Hello everyone, my name is Mateusz Grzeszczuk and this is a podcast about the world and international relations for them who want to know more. Hello everyone, my guest today Zsuzsa Ferenczy, affiliated scholar of Ray University Brussels, out of Europe, China and the limits of normative power. I'm very blessed, I'm glad to hear you.
Thank you for having me, Mateusz. It's great to be with you today.
Pelosi's visit to Taiwan, the situation in Ukraine, China's military reaction. Is the relationship between the USA and China the worst in decades?
Well, that's a good question. And I think it's a good place to start this conversation is to really grab the Pelosi visit that just happened in Taiwan, because that allows us to sort of look at where we are at the moment and where we come from in terms of US-China relations, and also the implications of the tension in the bilateral relationship for the region in the Indo-Pacific. So Pelosi's visit came, in my view, at a particularly fragile moment. The tension between Washington and Beijing had been growing already for years, and this was in particular intensified by Beijing's diplomatic support for Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and also Beijing's refusal to condemn the aggression. So recently, Xi Jinping had also accused the US of playing with fire over its Taiwan policy. So this tells us the climate in US-China relations, and also the timing of the visit is also very important because Xi Jinping heads into the party congress in the fall, where he is expected to secure a third term, which is unprecedented. And this also shaped the way Beijing responded to the visit. And in this context, I would say that the tension in US-China relation is at an unprecedented, perhaps unprecedented high level. And the reaction to the speaker's visit to Taiwan also tells us that this is the case. The reaction was extreme, disproportionate, and it was a coordinated show of force from Beijing, signaling to Washington that Beijing does not compromise on Taiwan, and also sending messages beyond Washington, sending a message to Taiwan that this is the new normal in a way, and the status quo in the Taiwan Strait is also at great risk because of this reaction from Beijing and the tension in US-China relations.
Okay. Has China shown that Taiwan really has something to fear? I'm asking this because many times experts in Poland have told me that Taiwan has been living in this fears for years. It's normal.
That is true. Taiwan has been living with and under this existential threat for decades. So it is not unexpected that Beijing would react in such a way. However, the scale of the reaction and the use of the military escalation, the military element in the reaction was, however, unprecedented in scale. We've seen warplanes flying over the median line in coordination with warships. Now, this is a significant change to the status quo in itself. So, of course, it is, and I agree with the observation and with the reality on the ground that the threat that Taiwan has been living under is not new. The people of Taiwan have been facing economic coercion, disinformation, cyber attacks, a mix of gray zone activities from Beijing. So it is not unexpected, as I said, but the scale of the threat is now at the highest level. And it's very important. And I appreciate your question because it is often what I see in commentaries or in the international media is to discuss what is happening between the United States and China when it comes to the Taiwan Strait or the Taiwan question per se. But we often forget to really look at what is happening inside Taiwan in terms of the perception of the situation, because I think there is a disconnect between the reading and the interpretation and what exactly is happening on the ground. So we should not forget what the people of Taiwan want.
I also heard the opinion, Tomasz Śnidziewski, a Pole in Taiwan, told me that the United States is doing worse things than the Pelosi visit. They have been training the army for years, supplying weapons. Suddenly, there was a lot of hype around the diplomatic visit.
Right. Well, I think this is where we need to take a step back, and we should not allow alarm to take over the focus, that we need to keep an eye on what is happening and what the people of Taiwan want. As we said, the threat is real. The threat has been growing, and there is an overall concern of the implications of a growing or a China that is increasingly hostile in the region. So this is not a problem that is only for Taiwan. This is the entire Indo-Pacific that is that feels or has to live with the implications of the hostility coming out of China, of the People's Republic of China. So I think it's very important that we avoid alarm, and also keep in mind that we need to find a way ultimately to communication, and to avoid mis and disinformation, and not to allow space for disinformation on what the United States wants, or what the people of Taiwan want, and what Beijing seeks to achieve. I think there is a huge discrepancy in perceptions and self-perceptions. But I think going forward, it is in the interest also of China to avoid an escalation that would spill over and create instability in the region, because China is interested in a stable environment in order to pursue its national interest and its development trajectory. So it is not in Beijing's interest. And I think this is something also that is very interesting to look at in the context of what is happening in Europe with Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and the implications of the instability and the uncertainty that causes all around the world, that does not allow perhaps China to, to go forward with its own plans as foreseen.
Mm-hmm. What defense potential does Taiwan have now?
Taiwan and the leadership in Taiwan has made it clear that it wants to increase its international profile, to increase cooperation with partners, and expects, in a way, support in the face of the authoritarian and the existential threat that it faces. But at the same time, Taiwan made it clear that they are to defend themselves. I think in light of the reaction to Pelosi's visit, there is a rethink in a lot of parts of the world, not only in Taiwan, but also in Beijing, because this was, in a way, a test that China provoked. China could test its own capabilities through the military drills. This was, I think, a critical test for Beijing, because it allowed the PLA to test the outcomes of its efforts to modernize its army, and also to reform itself over the recent decades. And it provided also knowledge to Beijing on Taiwan's own capacities to react and how it can defend itself. We are in the process in Taiwan to rethink its self-defense capabilities. And I think in society per se, because I think it's important to think about the leadership and the direction of the leadership, but also how this resonates within society. Already, in light of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the people inside Taiwan have, in a way, reconsidered their own capacities in terms of civil defense. So on several levels, we see a rethink and an investment in modernizing and strengthening defense capabilities. And I think this is going to continue, as much as I think that China is going to continue its threats, to escalate its threats. And this is something, as I said, it's not unexpected, because engaging Taiwan internationally is crossing a red line for China. It is a provocation. That's why the visit by Speaker Pelosi was seen as a provocation. But in fact, any visit to Taiwan by lawmakers coming from countries across the world, here I would mention European countries, even the European Parliament has sent already visits, official visits to Taiwan. All of this is seen as a provocation. And as a response to that, in order to project strength, I expect Beijing to continue its escalation, and it will be a mix of everything. As I said, it will be disinformation campaigns, influence operations, cyber attacks, and the military element, as we see in light of the visit, is going to gain more and more space.
Crystal ball, let's look to the future. The war is going on. What will be the reaction of Japan, South Korea, Australia?
Yeah, that's an important question. I think going forward, we see that in the region, democracies are in a way converging on the need to address and to find a common way to address the hostility and the assertive behavior that comes out of China, out of Beijing, that undermines the international rules-based order and a free and open Indo-Pacific. So we've seen initiatives in the security field, but also in the field of economic cooperation to strengthen the convergence between countries in the region. I think I would mention, first of all, Japan, the country that sort of stands out in the region as a democracy that has been most vocal, also following the visit and actually the reaction to the visit. We've seen Japan join the G7 in calling on China not to unilaterally change the status quo by force. But this is not a new development in itself. Japan has been more, for the past few years, has been more willing to make space for Taiwan in the political discourse. We've seen several statements also from the prime ministers, the previous prime ministers, saying that what happens in Taiwan affects Japan. And we also had President Biden and Prime Minister Kishida in May in 2022 jointly stressed the importance of peace and stability across the Taiwan Strait as an indispensable element in the international community. So all of this is very clear rhetoric in support of Taiwan, but I would say that in the case of Japan, it goes beyond the rhetoric, because we've seen throughout the pandemic the friendship between Japan and Taiwan strengthen with the help from Japan in terms of vaccines to Taiwan. And I would mention here also that I think this process in the political discourse in Japan has started with late Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, who called Taiwan a friend of Japan and an important partner already years ago, I would say back 5-6 years ago. And this has, in a way, kept on going in the Japanese discourse. Now, Japan's case is one out of several cases in the Indo-Pacific. South Korea has a different relationship with China, has a different relationship with Taiwan. There is not so much of a willingness to embrace Taiwan in Seoul's political discourse. In fact, we do see at the moment an opening in Seoul. Also, we see that through the decision to soon release an Indo-Pacific strategy in South Korea. And I think this is all an indication that South Korea is also, in a way, joining its partners, such as Japan, even though the situation and the relationship between Japan and South Korea is a difficult one. So that will be an important element in going forward for South Korea to deal with. But India, Australia have been also signaling an interest to converge and to cooperate both in security but also in the economic field. And all of this is sending a signal to Beijing that there are serious implications that will harm Beijing's own interests if Beijing continues on this path of assertiveness at the expense of a free and open Indo-Pacific. So I believe that this will continue increasing in the context of Quad or other economic frameworks.
Recently, we also had a visit from Japan representatives in Taiwan. Taiwan, China, United States, and security in the Pacific. Thank you very for your visiting, Zsuzsa Anna Ferenczy. Thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me, and stay in touch.